morning, everybody. I applaud your efforts to be here at 7 o'clock to talk about a somewhat dry topic, competency assessment, but something that is still very dear to all of our hearts. So with quite an introduction, I hope that Lorraine and I can deliver for you. And as Sarah Lynn was reading, I'm thinking, man, I'm getting old. But anyway, let me continue here. So I'm going to start and talk about a lot of the regulatory parts of this, and I'm not going to read the CFR to you because I really don't want you to go to sleep. So I'll try to hit some of the high points, and then Lorraine's going to wrap up with some very practical information on what we've done at Johns Hopkins as far as our competency assessments. So I'm going to talk about the AABB standard, the CAP requirements, and obviously about CLIA, which is incorporated into the CFR, and also just I put on the slide that you may have state regulations as well, and of course I'm not going to talk about those today, so I'll just focus on the national ones. So we have our AABB standard, which is part of the BBTS series, and I have listed here on this slide the actual verbiage from the 30th edition. So it doesn't say a whole lot there, but just that we have to evaluate competency before the staff member does independent work and at specified intervals, and you'll see there that it refers to two parts of the CFR. So I'm going to move on to the CAP requirements because CAP so nicely went into more detail about the CLIA regs that are in the CFR. So I wanted to point out these two. This one's revised, and the next one that we're going to talk about is actually new. So this is something that you may or may not be aware of, and I'll talk a little bit more in a minute about what non-waived is, if anybody is still a little unclear about that. But if you have more than one site that your staff work in, your testing personnel work at, and that's defined a little bit more simply for you, if it has a separate CAP number or it has a separate CLIA number, you may have to have those testing personnel perform the same tests at both sites, okay? And I say that because in the CAP checklist, and I'm using, as you can see from the slide, the revisions that were effective on August 21st of this year, there is a statement in there that says if there are variations in how a test is performed at different sites, those variations must be included in those specific competency assessments, okay? So, oh boy, same test, you have to do it twice, two different places, just gets more and more fun, doesn't it? So I thought I'd bring that one to your attention. So now I wanted to talk about the other requirement in the general checklist, which talks about the qualifications of the individuals who are actually assessing the competency of your testing personnel. So, and I'm not going to read this to you, but I thought I just wanted to focus a little bit on the complexity of the testing as it's defined by CMS, and also touch on what I think the education and experience requirements mean. And I guess at this point it would be really good for me to say that the content of my talk has not been vetted by any of the regulatory bodies. So this is my opinion, the opinion of the other folks. I'm blessed that I have 4 other assessors on my staff at Hopkins. And again, on my personal experiences over the many years that I've been assessed or assessing other institutions. So, can everybody hear me okay? Okay, good. I'm not known to be a quiet person, but I just thought I'd check. Okay, so let's go on a little bit about the complexity. So there's moderate and high. hopefully most of us know that we fall most of our tests, most of our tests fall into the high category, and that makes us a little bit more stringent on what personnel can actually do the assessment, the education and experience, which I'll get to a little bit later. And then the wave testing, which I'm not going to talk about, but Lorraine will touch a little bit on that in a bit. Okay, so I just thought CMS does a lengthy definition, if anybody wants to look it up, about what high complexity testing is, and it basically says whatever testing you perform to evaluate the compatibility between a donor and a recipient is considered high complexity. So basically everything we do pre-transfusion testing, even including a direct antiglobulin test, is considered high complexity. So I think this is probably the next couple slides is probably where most of us are more confused about things. I don't know about all of you, but when I first read the descriptions of who's a consultant, a technical or clinical, a technical or general supervisor, 3 of us had to sit down and wade through it about 4 times. So don't feel bad if you don't, if you got confused, because trust me, I did too. So because we do high complexity testing, I'm going to just focus the rest of the talk on the supervisors, like who's qualified as technical, who's qualified as general. And then Lorraine will go on and explain how we applied those things to the testing that we actually do at Johns Hopkins. So there's a myriad of sets of qualifications for both the technical and the general. Again, I didn't want to sit here and read to you. I didn't want to put you to sleep. But there's 5 sets all the way from qualifications from a physician to a person with a Bachelor of Science and 4 years of experience in high complexity in that specialty. Remember that with 4 years experience in high complexity in that specialty. I'll get to that later as perhaps one of the more common things that people get cited for. And then the general criteria actually add an associate's degree with 2 years. So you don't have to have super educated, qualified people to do these jobs, but you do have to be careful that you assign them in the appropriate way. This is something that's very, very, very important to remember. The lab director must delegate in writing the performance, including the review of competency assessment to qualified personnel. Don't forget that part. So now I'll move on to the CLIA and FDA requirements. So I was reading this one day, and I'm like, okay, as specified in subpart M. I'm like, oh, great. Now I'm down into the subparts. This is going to be fun. So again, I'm not going to discuss every part of subpart M because not all of it actually applies to competency testing, but there are 2 parts in Part B of 493.1235 that are germane to this topic. So Part B, number 8, is talking about the technical supervisor. So there's the leading sentence into that. So this part is the one where our beloved 6 elements are all listed. So again, direct observations of test performance, monitoring, recording, and reporting of testing results, review of worksheets, QC records, PT results, PM records. Those are fairly straightforward, simple, easy to remember to do. Direct observation of performance of instrument maintenance and function checks. That one gets missed a lot. Assessment of test performance through testing previously analyzed specimens. You can make up your own specimens. You can use PT specimens once you've submitted the results to the body that you purchased the materials from, not before. And evaluation of problem-solving skills. So again, I'm just pointing these out, and then Lorraine's going to bring it home, so to speak, and show you how we've implemented some of this at JHH. Okay, so Part B9 describes the familiar part to all of us regarding the frequency of testing. So again, I'm not going to read this one to you, but during the first year, we have to assess a competency at least semi-annually, and thereafter evaluations have to be performed at least annually. So I'm not quite sure anybody would want to do it more than annually, but that word least is in there. It's definitely painful enough. Okay, so I think we're finished here going over the actual requirements. And then here's the more important part, I thought, and this list has been compiled by myself and my other assessors on my staff, and also for things that we have been cited for at Johns Hopkins. So please don't think that we have this perfect every year for the past 40 years either. So I found these aren't listed in, this one, the one at the top is the most commonly found. I just kind of put them all together. But we do find that people, despite the fact that the FDA requirement says semi-annually in the first year, people miss that 6 month, and it's not really 6 months, it's semi-annually in the first year. So if it's 7 months, I don't think anybody's going to ding you on that one. But, it's very difficult. You've got all the training checklists, you've got everything else that this new employee has to do, and then somehow somebody misses the competency semi-annually. I don't often see that annual competency isn't done, but I have seen that people don't keep a good enough record so that one staff member or two staff members didn't finish their competency that particular year. So, it's a very daunting task, but, we have to be organized and make sure that everybody gets that done every year. And I know nobody likes to do it, but, it's the industry that we live in. Or they've done it, but somebody was really late, and now it's been way past the annual time. And again, I alluded to this next bullet where not all 6 elements are always tested. I think I see more often that there aren't any direct observations of the performance of instrument maintenance or function checks, okay? Or no documentation of problem solving. And then a couple others. Lorraine's going to address how to define a test system. I'll find test systems that just aren't done at all. And the next one is supervisory staff who perform patient testing, and I know that applies to a lot of us, including myself. We're all required sometimes to pitch in on the bench, but don't forget that if we're functioning as a testing person, or part of the personnel, our competency has to be assessed on the testing part just like everyone else's. Or perhaps limited competency testing was performed, or the person wasn't indicated on the laboratory personnel evaluation roster. How many people love that roster as much as I do? I get so confused by that thing sometimes. Or the reviewer of the competency testing wasn't qualified to do that role, or that it wasn't delegated in writing by the director. That one I see a lot. We forget to write down who we delegated something to. And I just wanted to show you, this is a little bit older picture, but this is in our brand new laboratory. This is us standing in front of our walk-in refrigerator. We were all excited, but our lab's actually 5 years old now. so not so new. This is our day shift and evening shift at the time, I think. So that's all of us, and there's Lorraine way over there on the right-hand side with her hand in the refrigerator, and just us going about our daily work. And I thought you might be interested just to know a little bit more about Hopkins and our Transfusion Service division. I have 47 FTEs and 6 part-time staff. In FY18, we performed over 110,000 type-in screens and over 75,000 cross-matches. We transfused over 90,000 blood products, and of that, about 45,000 red cells, and we transfuse over 20,000 apheresis platelets every year. So we're a really busy transfusion service, and because of that, our competency assessment is enormous. I'm always amazed that the staff is able to complete it as quickly and efficiently as they can. So that's the end of my part of the program, and I thank you very kindly for your attention.
Good morning. So I'm not as tall as Joan, so I'm going to kind of move it to the side so that I can kind of see everybody. All right, so Joan just went through all the requirements and things like that, and I'm pretty much just going to tell you what I do and how I interpret it. It's not to be all-inclusive. These are the only options. It's just how I decided to try to go through it. And what really was difficult for me when CAP came out and said you had to have these 6 assessment methods was, how do I do this? Like, how do I change everything that I'm doing? How do I make it so I can get it done for everybody? Because as you saw, we have a lot of people in our lab, and get it done consistently without missing anything, and so we don't get cited on anything. So these are a couple things that I'm going to discuss today. So I'm going to talk to you about what staff need to be assessed and trying to determine who needs what. And so that way you're not necessarily going overkill on somebody that doesn't need everything, but at the same time you're making sure that anybody that does need to be assessed gets the right assessment completed. You need to delegate competency, so Joan just mentioned how that's one of those deficiencies that keeps getting cited that she sees, and so how you can easily go about doing that. Then how do you get the work done with like the minimal effort? So I'm going to tell you how I kind of group similar things and how I group test systems together. Also, formatting, that was a big one for us, as not our lab, not in blood bank, but the other labs got cited for formatting issues. So you need to standardize your format, and I'm just going to make a couple suggestions as what you can do to make sure things are included. Also, problem solving, so that was another one of getting cited. So I have 2 different ways you can go about determining somebody for problem solving. And let you know what we do. And then ultimately, I'm going to tell you about my wish list of what I want to happen in the future, and then if anyone's out there and wants to design an electronic quality management system for me that does competency assessments, you need to contact me afterwards. Okay, so because I really want something like that at some point. Okay, so this is my one slide on just saying who needs to have competency assessment. So Joan went over the moderate and high for the non-wave testing, and so most blood banks do fall into that high complexity category. And so you see that we need to have the semi-annual and the annual competency done, and that we have to have all 6 assessment methods per test system. Whereas when we get to the wave testing personnel and our non-testing personnel, you don't necessarily have to do that. You don't need a semi-annual in the first year. You just need it annually. And you don't have to do all 6 assessment methods, because guess what? A lot of times the non-testing personnel, what are you going to do for a blind sample for them? I don't know, because they don't do any testing. So in our laboratory, most everybody is a high complexity individual. But we do have 1 or 2 people that fall into that non-testing personnel category. And so they're pretty much just signing in blood products and sampling for our bacterial detection. So they're doing mostly that pre-analytical step. So if you have anybody in your laboratory that's not actually doing any testing, you only have to pick 2 of the assessment methods, and you can pick whichever 2 you want. So whichever ones are easiest for you. So you can just keep that in mind. For the wave testing personnel, if you work at a donor center, this might be somebody who does some donor screening or something like that, might spun hematocrits, something more simple to those types of things. So once again, you don't have to do all 6 assessment methods. So that might be helpful to like kind of let something be a little less cumbersome and to divide up your staff accordingly. All right, so next, we need to delegate. So she just talked about how we have general supervisor qualifications. Well, just because someone isn't a supervisor doesn't mean they can't be in that general supervisor category. And so you may want to consider having anybody that fits into that category be somebody that can assess competency. I cannot assess competency in every person that's in our laboratory. It's just not possible. So we have to delegate it. And so the way we delegate it is to anybody that has the minimum requirements for that general supervisor. And so at the same time, we delegate training to those people too. So we actually call them our trainers, and they also assess competency. So it kind of gets twofold for that. Then the biggest thing is we need to delegate it to them. So what we've done is I made a form. So things get delegated, and then we actually have a form for each individual person that when they become a trainer, it's going to fill out. So at the same time, you can list your test systems on this, and they can check off which test systems they can assess. So that's really helpful to say, okay, they're trained, they're in this system, so not everybody's trained at every test system that you may have. For instance, we have a molecular and platelet antibody testing laboratory that we may have 3 people that are trained at those. So those are the people that can assess competency in those areas. Our other people that are not trained in those cannot assess competency, so they would not be checking off that category. So this is just an example here, and so you would check off which test system someone can assess competency in, have them sign it, and also have your laboratory director or other designee sign it as well, and then keep that for your records. All right, next we're on to grouping similar techniques and methods, and so I'm going to talk a little bit about test systems, and this was really the hardest thing for me, and I feel like once I got this knocked out, I was ready to go, got everything else figured out. So, and also you want to keep in mind when you're doing this, you want to try to get things grouped so you're doing the least amount of work to get the biggest benefit out of it, I guess. So, your test system. So you need to define these. So Joan just said that she has cited people for not defining their test systems. It really should be defined in your competency assessment SOP as to what your test systems are, okay? Then you want to try to group them accordingly. So I struggle with this with, manual testing. Do you group it by each test? Do you group it, how are you grouping these things together? So what I ended up doing was we group our procedures and we group our checklists, right, for training. So I just grouped my competencies that way, all right? So I have a testing procedure section. We have a testing training checklist. And so I have a testing competency. So anything that has manual testing that's in that procedure set that's on that checklist is now in my competency. We have automation, so that is in itself is one test system for each instrument that we have. We have a reference laboratory, that is a separate test system. We have a test system called non-testing, so that's a fun one to do, just especially for the blind samples. So, and then we have donor processing, and then the platelet lab and molecular lab as well. So I just basically grouped them based on how our procedures were already grouped. So if you're already grouping things in that way, that's a really easy way to kind of define your test systems. And the other really nice thing about that is if somebody's not trained in a certain test system, then you can say, okay, well then these procedures pertain to this test system. They don't have a training checklist done, so guess what? They don't have to be done competency for that test system because they haven't been trained at it. So it made it really easy to kind of streamline that so I wasn't missing any test system for any of our employees. All right, so this is just an example when I talk about grouping things. So in our laboratory, we do have solid phase, we have gel column, and we have tube methods that we do. And just for an example, we're going to say that we do antibody screens, panels, and cross matches. Well, the nice thing is I don't have to do all of these by every single method. So I can decide, I want to do my solid phase my antibody screen by solid phase, that I want to do a panel by gel, and I want to do my cross matches by tube. And so, okay, that hits all of my methods and all of my tests. So I don't necessarily have to do one for each. And then guess what? The following year, I can switch it up and say, all right, I'm going to do my panel by solid phase, my antibody screen by tube, and my cross match by gel. So now I'm hitting all of those methods again, because a panel is the same as an antibody screen, is the same as a cross match in most of these systems. And then I can switch it up again the following year and kind of keep everything going. So this way, I'm actually only doing 3 tests for competency assessment instead of 9. And so you can do this going on for other types of things. This is just my example for that. All right. I am a stickler for forms. I like a lot of white space on things. And I also like things being very easy to look at. I'm very fortunate when the assessors come in and look at my competency. They generally look at it for about a minute, and that's it. So if you can have a competency that's very easy to read and understand, they're not going to be looking really hard at it. So if it's something really straightforward. So things that we got cited on, like I said, not in the blood bank because we do really awesome, but in the other areas of the lab, they were cited because the employee's name was not on every page of their competency. So I kind of staple everything all together for each test system, but they wanted it on every page because what if you take the staple out, okay, and you lose a page? How do you know whose that was? You really don't. So making sure employee's name and the laboratory section or organization is on every page. I suggest putting it in the header so you don't have to type it on every page. And then if you print it out, it's on every page. You didn't have to do much more work for it. Also, I recommend numbering your pages for your competency. So what I do, since I have so many employees, and my competencies are about this thick for each employee, that takes up a whole drawer just for 1 year. All right, I don't have all these drawers. I have to keep them all for 5 years, right? I don't have all these drawers to put these things in, so I end up scanning everything. It's really helpful when I go back to review to make sure that everything was scanned when I have page numbers on. So if it's 1 of 2 or 2 of 2, like I can at least make sure that I'm not missing anything. And that also helps because there's been other times where I printed things and somehow somebody grabbed a page from the middle of it and somebody didn't get that page. But they knew that because they noticed the page numbers that something was missing. So I do recommend putting page numbers on your competency. You also, this one is key, and this is, I think, where I get it so that they don't really look too much in detail at my competency, is I define the assessment method on my competency form. And the next slide, I will show you what it looks like. So there's no guessing. So when I say I do an ABO typing on somebody, I can spell it out and say, oh, we have a direct observation of test performance. We have a entering into the laboratory information system right there. So I spread it out so you have 2 of the assessment methods when you're just doing your normal work. Also, you want to make sure that when you're putting things in, you have dates, you have a spot for satisfactory or unsatisfactory performance, and that you can identify the assessor on the competency. Whether you use initials and use a signature log or the person has to sign it, you need to know who's assessing the person as well. And so that was another one that was cited this year by other laboratories as well, as they couldn't read the handwriting of the initials. So you need to have a good way to be able to identify that assessor. All right, so this is my form, and this is a shortened version. I tried to make it so everything was on one page so you could kind of see it. And so this, I'm just kind of shortened it a little bit to just, I think it's our ABO typing. So you can see here that I have quality control as our record that you could review. And so this can be on paper or electronic. So either way, the person's doing it. You don't have to watch them necessarily. Oops. I hit a button I didn't expect. Okay, sorry. So you don't actually have to watch them do QC necessarily because that would be a review of record. But I just want to show you kind of up here at the top, I've defined what my test system, my competency assessment systems are. All right, so then when I come down here, I've literally just put a number by it. So that, and I've broken everything down into their pieces. So for AB and RH typing, you can see that I have 1, I have a 4 for priming the serologic centrifuge, so that is a maintenance function. Pretty easy, takes less than a minute to do, but that's part of it. And then entering into the LIS system. So right there I have 3. My QC gives me a 4th one. And then I have a blind sample, which then I normally just have them write them down on the form, so it's all together. And then I'll talk about what I do for problem solving. Yeah, I couldn't fit that all on one piece of paper. So, but I've labeled them. So when someone looks at it, it's like, oh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You have all of them. Okay. So. All right. So problem solving. So some things might work better for you. I do written questions just because I have so many people. And so it's easier for me to write questions and then go back and grade them for that. So when writing, using questions for your problem-solving assessment, you need to have passing criteria, okay? You can't expect everybody to get 100% all the time because sometimes I don't write great questions sometimes. Every once in a while there's one that just everybody gets wrong. So I want to make sure I account for that because sometimes it's more about what the question I think it says, not what they're reading it as. So you just want to kind of keep that in mind that 100% really can't be your passing criteria just because people like to interpret things the way they are. And we're blood bankers. We overanalyze everything. So to be like, well, this is this question, but in this situation, I'm like, just look at the general people. Not that one rare instance that is the exception, okay? So you just kind of need to keep that in mind. And a lot of times I have people write beside it a justification. So you should always reference these questions to your SOPs or to other technical references so that you have something to go back to. So my answer key, I literally write down where I got the answer from. Now, the hardest part with that is when you're writing questions, you want to make sure that that's not something they're going to update soon in your procedure and that then it goes away or the answer changes in the middle of your competency assessment period. So you may want to talk with whoever is reviewing the procedures and make sure that's not going to change anytime soon. I've had that happen and it literally changed the answer to one of the other ones, okay? So, and if that is the case, you may need to document that and make sure the answer is changed. Other things you can do for problem solving, hypothetical scenarios, all right? I love hypothetical scenarios because you can actually present a situation and have people respond how they would react, and that truly evaluates how they solve problems. So specimen acceptability, I would give them an example. I'd make up something or take a picture of something, embed it, and ask them, is this sample acceptable? That's a problem-solving thing, and if it's not, why? What would you do next? Equipment failures. What would you do if the instrument started having this alert? What would you do to clear that alert? All right, and these are things that should be able to reference in some type of manual of some sort. Product selection. Give a patient scenario. What type of product would you give? All right, those are some pretty easy questions that you can write that would evaluate their problem-solving skills. Also keep in mind that I was down on the floor, they have a lot of different groups sell competency assessment kits that are your blind samples, okay? Some of them allow you to log on and answer questions based on that. Those can count towards it too. You just have to document, that the person passed. Usually they have some type of way you can print out or, screenshots what their passing score was on that, and you can attach it to your competency. I used that recently for a reference one that, 3 of my problem-solving questions were given by the competency kit that I purchased. So keep those in mind. You can use those too. All right, so here's just an example of some problem-solving questions that I have and what it looks like, and this would all be together with the previous one that I showed you. And so I just want to point out my passing criteria. So I have basically directions saying what to do, what you can use to look up your answers. Any reference you can use when you're doing a test, you can use that same reference to answer these problem-solving questions, and then to have, how many points and what is the passing criteria. And then also, it's important to say that if they don't pass, what's going to happen, all right? So that's another important thing. So if someone does not pass their competency assessment, you're going to have to restrict them from doing that test system until they have passed the competency assessment. And so you need to document that, either a recompetency, retraining type of situation before they can go back to doing those independent testings. All right, so review of records for problem solving. So if you have a smaller laboratory, this might work better for you. Not having to write questions or anything like that. So you can actually go back and look and see what your staff have done for problem solving. They problem solve every day. The important thing is you just got to document it and show that you reviewed it as part of their competency assessment. So if you have equipment logs, if some instrumentation or if some equipment stops functioning, what did they do? Did they take it out of service? Did they do any type of calibration or qualifications when it came back into service? Those would be something that would be problem solving. Antibody workups. That's the heart of what we do, all right? Antibody workups are problem solving. So you can have that be your QC review records for antibody panels and your problem solving, all right? So you can double dip on that one. And then QC documents. You have to monitor the temperatures. Well, what happens if it alarms? Did somebody do something? Did they write down what they did? Great. So they just did some problem solving for that. And what if your reagent QC doesn't work? All right, what did they do to follow up to get things back to working again? The biggest thing here is we know these people do the problem solving every day. You just need to document that you reviewed that they did the problem solving and what they did. So it's important to document the date of when those occurred and where you can find it so that if assessor comes and says, oh, I want to see it, you can find it easy enough. Another thing you can do is if you have a document of it, photocopy it, attach it to the competency, or scan it and attach it to the competency so you don't have to go hunting for it. It makes it a little bit easier, but if you have a good system of logging things, like you have some type of system where you keep your equipment logs electronically where you can pull it up pretty easily, then there's no reason to add it to it, just as long as you know what you're looking for and have some way to find it. All right, so that's pretty much what we do. The last couple of slides that I have are things that I want in the future. So I alluded to this before. So like I said, I have a whole drawer of just 1 year's annual competency assessments in my office. I don't have that much space to keep everything, so I do have to scan it, which means it takes me hours to do that, to scan it. When I do scan it, I then go back, review it, make sure I include all of the forms that are there. I then put it onto our server with under a file for the year with the employee's name that's competency for. Once I finish all of that, I then burn it on a CD, so I have 2 copies of it, make sure I don't lose anything, and then I get rid of all the paper. So that takes me some time with having 47 plus full-time employees plus part-time employees. So it's very, very cumbersome. And I use a lot of paper in this effort. So we can go to electronic quality management systems. Some of the benefit to that is we can reduce the paper that we use and disposal. So right there, we're saving some money to that. We reduce the time that I spend printing, scanning, and reviewing, all right, because I do have to grade all those questions. So that takes some time as well. We need to prevent inadvertent loss of paperwork. So how many times have someone come in and says, I want to see the competency for this person, and you're going through a door because you have to go keep 5 years worth, right? And you're going through a door trying to find that one person for that 1 year's competency assessment, and you have trouble finding it. When I scan it, it's much easier to find for me. So if we can have a way that we don't even have to deal with that, you don't have to worry about losing it. Being able to assess those records a little bit easier. We can also meet our document requirements. And then we can also assist in the review process when assessors do come. And then also ensure all activities are completed on time. So this is my big one. So I give out this big pack of paper in January. And I make my deadline May 31st, even though our real deadline is June 30th, because people like to push the limits. And so I always make it a little bit earlier. So then, May 29th comes around. Hey, how are we doing on your competency? How's it coming? Oh, I'm almost done. Okay, can I see any of it? I got it. It's in my locker. Okay. So then May 31st comes around. Are you done? I'm almost done. I'm almost done. But I had no idea. They could have done nothing to this point. I have no clue until they show it to me. Whereas if I have some type of electronic system, I can go in, look them up, and see what they actually have completed and where they are. So when they say they're almost done, do they only have one thing left to do? Do they have 20 things left to do? You know, it gives me a better idea of where they're at. So that's one thing that I really would be hopeful for. Okay, so these are my wants and my needs. So some of the things are needs, some of the things are my wants. So just keep in mind. Obviously, in the system, we need to meet all 6 CAP assessment methods. And the biggest thing with this is it needs to have a way to designate somebody as being non-waived, waived, or non-testing personnel. So you have the option of going in and making it that all 6 are required, or you only need 2. Because if you don't have that, it's going to not be very flexible for those people that don't need all 6. But at the same time, if you let it available for those, it's not going to ensure that you have all 6. So what I want something when we're designing our assessments, because that's another thing we got cited on, once again, not in our laboratory, but was that there was not all 6 assessment methods assessed, meaning it literally was just not on the thing. So whoever designed the competency assessment didn't include it. So who's going to check that? So if you have a system that's going to flag you, says, hey, you don't have number 4, you know, your direct observations of instrument and equipment maintenance and function checks, you know, it's going to flag you for that. So therefore, you wouldn't be missing those things in the future, especially if someone is new to creating competency assessments or the whole department has not done this before. And you can make sure that they're all there. Also, it needs to be adaptable for both CP and AP, all right? So we don't work alone in the blood bank. We also have other people that do different things. AP is very different for clinical pathology, and CAP's a little inflexible, so we need to have something that's adaptable for AP as well, all within the same assessment system. There needs to be an leveled access, so very much like we do in our, you know, laboratory information systems, that you have the user, and then you have somebody else that's a little bit above that, and then somebody else that's kind of the overarching person. I think at least 3 levels would be needed, but you know, a couple more wouldn't hurt. So you have your employee access, so they could only see themselves. Then you'd have an assessor access, where they could see themselves, you know, as a user, but also see the people that are assigned to them to be assessed. So they know what they have to do. They can go in and they can sign them off on things. But if they're not an assessor, they can't see that. But at the same time, then you have more of a reviewer that can see everybody in your division's competency, so you can keep track of everything. This would be the person that would be reviewing the problem solving, if you have questions, blind samples, things that are kind of beyond that direct observation category. And then you also would have somebody maybe in administration that's kind of overseeing competency for your whole department to see that everybody has finished and that things are all in the same kind of format. This other one would save me much time. So auto grading and scoring of problem solving questions, if you decide to do that. So you would just go in and you would have the questions, they'd answer it, they get immediate feedback saying, you got it correct, you got it wrong, but then also explain what is the correct answer, where is it cited at. So, because right now, it takes me a while to grade everything, and then I don't want to tell them the answers because other people are still finishing them. So I literally get back to them probably 6 months later with, oh, you got this question wrong. That's not really effective, is it? No. So it's better, and they're like, what was the question again? I don't even remember. So if you can get immediate feedback and giving the answers and the reasoning behind the answers, it'd probably be a more effective tool. And it keeps going, I swear. So we also have to have the ability to attach supportive documentation. So either through scanning paper documents or taking screenshots and attaching it so that it can all be there together. So when the assessor comes in, you're not hunting through a pile of documents and records to find what you are, to show them that the person actually completed that assessment method. Email notification and reminders. This would be awesome that I wouldn't have to spell out everybody. I could just be like, oh, whoever has not done their competency yet, I can send out a reminder to say, hey, competencies are due on this date. That would be really nice to have that within the assessment system that links up with the email system of your institution. Also, it's really nice to would be able to generate reports on performance. So currently, when I want to go through and see how we did collectively on our problem-solving questions, I literally have to go through each one's questions and add them up and see which ones that, like, a lot of people got wrong, the same one wrong, and then that might be a source of education. Whereas if something's being auto-graded, they get that feedback right away. You can give them education on it, but then I can also get reports back saying, this is the question that people struggled with, and maybe I can look at it and say, oh, maybe that's not a good question. Or, oh, this is something we need to review again. So having that to just show that, once again, the person who's creating the competency knows what they're doing. So, also archival and retrieval of records, so we could keep our records. And that way we can get rid of them after the 5 years, or they can literally stay there indefinitely. But it would make it so ease of access. You're not hunting through things to be able to produce those documents when the assessors arrive. And electronic signature, you have to have your assessments signed. They have to sign them. So obviously printing them out and signing them, that's not really helpful. But having an electronic signature, we do it for everything else. Why can't it be included in this as well? And like I said, it keeps going. Okay, so now I want an employee dashboard. So this is something where they would log in. Ideally, if you could get it where whatever sign-in that they use for getting into their LIS system would be the same login for this system as well would be ideal. And so they could log in, and they could see what test systems they were assigned. That would be assigned by whoever is in charge of competency assessment for that area. And then they could see where their progress was and see what they have left. And at the same time, that similar dashboard can be looked up by somebody with a higher access level. So you can assign test systems to trained users. So if there's some way that you could actually make this system also include your training checklist, which I know I'm really reaching for the stars, right? But so you'd have your trainings in the same system, so you could actually crosswalk it. So that, you know, if they have a training checklist, then it could also automatically add their competency assessment for that test system to them when the time period starts. And then you'd also have the standardized formats. And so you could look at things. And then if you also possibly have some involvement with people that have your instrumentation, that sometimes they already have some competency assessment methods already there for you, that you could literally import them and use them as your own, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Because ideally, they should know your instrumentation better than you do, ideally, anyway. So you just want to kind of keep those things in mind, and this is what I would like to see in the future. Just so you know, I haven't come across one that meets my needs or my wants yet, so hint, 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 okay. So this is the end of our presentation. Hopefully you find it helpful. If you have any questions, I'm sure Joan and I would be more than happy to take any questions, because I think we have a couple minutes left. This is our contact information. I have plenty of people that email me later for different things and ask, you know, what can I do? What do you think this would work? And I'm totally cool with it. I'm very opinionated, and I love to give my opinion. So please, so I'm totally cool with that. Also, so this is just a picture of Joan and myself and one of our former employees, Wei Kai. And we do actually take in international visitors, and so these were two of our visitors from China that came to visit us, and they took a picture. It was the only picture I could find with Joan and I together, so this is what you got. All right, and then these were just the references that we used for the presentation.